El Centro, December 14th. It was a sunny but cold morning. We left our post and returned to Highway 8. In the distance, a mountain range was visible. Our route almost touched Mexico. Sparsely populated area desert. Here and there, cacti and dry grass could be seen. Only when human ingenuity intervened in the form of artificial irrigation did the land yield its bounty in the form of orange groves and cultivated fields. This was especially true of the area around the city of Yuma, near which the Colorado River flows, with dams built on it, Imperial and Laguna, for more efficient use of its waters. Here we said goodbye to California and entered the state of Arizona again. We now turned away from the Mexican border and continued through the desolate desert landscape. A gentle wind was blowing, occasionally showering us with desert sand. It was like a distant drumming when the sand hit the car body. We drove through several smaller settlements towards Gila Bend, where we turned onto Highway 85, heading south. The road was somewhat non-standard. No wonder. Our journey through the western states of the USA was definitely coming to an end, and with it, the land of good roads. We drove another 53 miles through an almost uninhabited region. We stopped in Ajo because I spotted the name of an insurance company, Sunborns, that had been recommended to me for covering the car in Mexico and Central America, but it was closed. Well, of course, it's Sunday. Zita now remembered that she needed photographs, which are necessary for entering Mexico. We asked a local policeman, who just shrugged when we asked where we could get photos taken. But then he kindly offered to bring his Polaroid camera. He was back in 25 minutes, and Zita received 2 photos. Then he invited us for coffee and a chat at a pleasant local restaurant. It was quite cold outside, so we gratefully accepted the invitation. We talked about Mexico, life, and things around us. Our policeman was a really good man, so I confided in him about my problem that had been keeping me up at night. What to do with my rifle? Our new friend only confirmed what I already knew. It is indeed very difficult to bring this thing into Mexico. He couldn't even offer me any advice, so I gave up. Now, in short, I sold the rifle at a considerable loss to our friend, who paid me $70. It cost me $130. But I had no other choice. Then we parted with wishes for all the best. We drove through the town, copper mining, which already showed some signs of isolation, and continued on our way. We originally wanted to spend the night in the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, which we reached after dark, but we found that there was nothing there but cacti. So we drove back, 15 to 20 miles, to Ajo, where we had a bit of dinner, and I then wrote in my diary under the local streetlights. Around 1 o'clock, we parked at a small motel and went to sleep. Ajo, December 15th. We woke up early in the morning because we had a long journey ahead of us. We drove through the sleeping town and on towards the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. Even before the park gates, it was possible to see many different cacti. The concentration was much higher in the park. Hilly landscape, dry land, and only cacti, dry grass, and shrubs. Some cacti reached truly significant dimensions, equaling a medium-sized tree in height and size. We visited the information center here, where we learned a bit about life in this area. A few more miles brought us to the border town of Lukeville. We bought some food here, turned north for the last time, waved goodbye to the United States, and around 11 o'clock, we entered Mexico. Only our passports were checked. A little further on, we stopped. We were in a small village called Sonoita. I wanted to inquire about car insurance here. A meagerly equipped office and a smiling man greeted us. Insurance for 25 days was easily $90. I didn't like this amount at all, so I decided to take on the risk of traveling without insurance. We continue on. Immediately after crossing the border, we find ourselves in a different world. Poorer, harsher, and sadder. The first meager dwellings, people with rough features, bearing the marks of a difficult life. The general unkemptness of the surroundings. We left Sonoita on Highway 2. The road surface was asphalted and generally in good condition. We overtake a small truck that looks like it's about to fall apart into a pile of old iron. After 25 kilometers, we stopped at another border control. We are issued a special paper for the car. Then we went to a customs inspection. I was afraid it would be serious, but we weren't even properly questioned. I was very pleased with this procedure. Nearby, we stopped again. I filmed a few more cacti, and then off we went. The road leads through a generally unchanging landscape of mountains, hills, and sparse vegetation. But it's a beautiful sight, and it's something quite different again from what we've been privileged to see so far. We drive through several small, shabby-looking villages. However, the local cemetery was an extraordinary sight. So colorful that it was dazzling. And what a contrast to the surrounding landscape. Beyond Santa Ana, we joined Highway 15, which led us to the gates of the first larger city in Mexico. The capital of the state of Sonora, Hermosillo, 208,164 inhabitants, was a surprisingly nice city, but we only drove through it. It was getting late, but we decided to continue. The mountain range somewhat opened up. We drive through an almost uninhabited landscape that slowly slopes towards the Gulf of California. A strange formation of mountains appeared in the glow of the setting sun. Yes, the destination of today's stage, Guaymas, is quite certainly behind the barrier of these peaks. It was already dark when we drove through the first streets of the city, 86,806 inhabitants. We noticed several nice motels, which we considered for tonight's stay. However, we continued towards the city center. There was such a hustle and bustle that it was dazzling. I didn't know where to look first. Shops, stalls, street vendors, locals and tourists, cars, bikes, and pedestrians, all in a whirlwind of spontaneous life. Guaymas is an important commercial shipping port. When we had our fill of this spectacle, we returned to our motel. I parked, we had a bit of dinner, and then went to sleep. Guaymas, December 16th. Around 8 o'clock we are on the road again. We left Guaymas on Highway 15 and turned away from the sea, continuing through a mountainous landscape covered with dry vegetation. The road surface was average in terms of quality. The settlement seemed somewhat denser than on the previous stretch of the journey. However, the standard of housing is truly miserable. It's hard to believe that people in this century can live in such poor conditions. I cannot come to terms with this reality. It is a bitter experience that will never fade from my memory. For the first time in my life, I am face to face with misery. I have wanted to film these wretched settlements built from all sorts of junk several times, but it's really difficult. It requires tact. None of us would want to be filmed in the midst of our humiliation and poverty, so I keep waiting for my opportunity. The road was littered with the corpses of dogs, cats, and other animals. Once we even saw a donkey or a small cow. And no wonder! Everything wanders around the road, and Mexicans drive like they're racing. No one bothers to stop. We drove through the city of Ciudad Obregón, where I went to a bank to exchange money. For $100 I got 12.48 pesos. Obregón, 114,800 inhabitants, is quite a busy city. We leave behind small settlements, villages, and towns. We leave the state of Sonora and enter the state of Sinaloa. The first larger city is Los Mochis, 67,953 inhabitants, which lies almost at sea level. A 4-lane highway for perhaps 40 miles allows us to proceed faster. The road leads mainly through lowlands, but the ridges of mountains are still in sight. Around 5 p.m., we arrived in the capital of the state of Sinaloa, Culiacán, 360,412 inhabitants. A generally nice city, located in the middle of a rich agricultural area, tomatoes, peppers, in the valley of the Rios Culiacán and Himalaya. We decide to spend the night here, but after a short consideration, we continue on our way. We step on it a bit because we want to reach Mazatlan, which is 141 miles away. The journey passed relatively quickly. Nevertheless, we enter Mazatlan at night. The traffic on the city's poor roads was a bit chaotic. I couldn't believe my eyes. It seemed that half the city was on bikes and half was strolling the streets. It was crowded everywhere. I made my way through this mix of life very slowly. Now I found myself on a one-way street where the commotion was even greater. After passing this street, there was some relief in the traffic. We got to Ave del Marche, a beautiful avenue perhaps 5 kilometers long. It encircled the beaches of the Pacific Ocean in a gentle semicircle, lined with motels, hotels, and restaurants. We drove slowly along this avenue. At its end, we discovered a small shop where we bought necessary groceries. We drove along Ave del Mar once more, and on the way back, we stopped here and there and strolled a bit. We peeked into shops and restaurants and continued on. We were also looking for a suitable place to spend the night. Most of the motorhome parks, however, were guarded. Finally, we found a fairly luxurious campsite, hot/cold water, swimming pool, where we finally ended today's stage. It was a pleasant, warm night, and so sleep came quickly. Mazatlan, December 17th to December 19th. We were really very satisfied. We could finally take a shower, do laundry, and rest a bit from traveling. Just that took us almost the whole day. We chatted a bit with our neighbors, and the rest of the day we lazed around. In the evening, we went out into the streets and observed the hustle and bustle around us. This whole area around Ave del Mar was purely a tourist area. Everything here was too orderly and un-Mexican. We returned to the campsite around 11 p.m. and went to sleep. The next morning, we received a visit from Yukon, a middle-aged couple. They wanted to buy some small items in the city, but they didn't speak Spanish, so Zita offered to be their interpreter. We drove together to the city center, where we visited the market, which was a veritable human anthill. It was extraordinarily colorful but a bit dirty. Many strange foods, fruits and vegetables, sweets, and all sorts of things. We walked through this hustle and bustle and moved on. Our friends needed some small items from sports goods stores and 2 decked chairs from a furniture store. Zita managed to get a good deal, and so our Yukoners were satisfied. We returned to the campsite and prepared something for lunch. In the afternoon, I gave Zita a buzz cut, for which I received nothing but displeasure. Then I got a haircut. Then we took showers. When I returned from the shower, Zita was talking to a younger unknown couple. We said hello, and I later found out that it was Mr. Gary and Mrs. Ida Cooper and 2 boys, Keith and Carlos, who had learned from our neighbor that we were planning to visit South America. They had the same plans, so they invited us for a little chat in their Airstream. It was a very pleasant evening and a nice acquaintance. We agreed that we would continue the journey together. Then we returned to our car, where we were visited a little later by an employee of the campsite with a bill for 70 pesos for yesterday and today. So, for the first time, we had to pay for accommodation. It bothered me a bit because we don't have much money left, but it's done. It was a nice campsite. We're leaving tomorrow. That's all we needed. In the morning, 2 Mexicans visited us, trying to sell us a rather nice silver ring, decorated with turquoise. I refused for perhaps an hour, but the guys were good salesmen. They left with 100 pesos in their pockets, and Zita got the ring. So be it. Christmas is just around the corner, we must be generous. Then we tidied everything up nicely, and around 11 o'clock, we knocked on the Cooper's door. We had breakfast, and then set off on the next stage of our journey. This time we just followed the huge trailer in front of us. Gary was moving very fast. It was hot. The landscape remained unchanged. After about 40 miles, the road began to climb again. We crossed the border of the state of Nayarit. We drove through several villages whose appearance evoked pity. What poverty! What a life! And still higher. From a distance, it was possible to observe the peak of the extinct volcano Sangangua, at whose foot lies Tepic, 110,939 inhabitants, located at an altitude of 3,000 feet. Tepic is the capital of the state of Nayarit. We drove through several streets filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life. Almost in the middle of the city, a large thermal power plant was emitting huge clouds of black smoke. We turned right off the main road and after a few miles parked at a local campsite. The campsite was again very well equipped. Zita and I went for a little walk. We came across a small open-air restaurant. They mainly serve drinks here. My attention was drawn to a large poster of Fidel Castro. I was really very surprised because I thought that goods of this kind were strictly prohibited. Then we went back, and later, together with the Coopers, we drove to the city center. It was very busy here, as in all Mexican cities. We parked and went shopping. Zita and I wanted to prepare dinner today, but we couldn't find peppers and mushrooms. Well, we were satisfied with what we got and returned home. Dinner was a success, and so with full stomachs, we had a long discussion about worldly things. Then it was time for bed. Tepic, December 20th. In the morning, we spruced up the Volvo a bit, and then ourselves, in the shower. We had breakfast, and around noon, we left Tepic. Highway 15, which we continued on towards Guadalajara, was marked by the scent of Mexico's popular drink, liquor, tequila, but only figuratively. It was a really beautiful journey that led mainly through a mountainous landscape with distant views of a wide region of deep valleys and high hills. We left the state of Nayarit and entered the state of Jalisco. My attention was drawn to cacti that were cultivated on huge plantations along the road. I later found out that it is a cactus-like plant called maguey, from which the well-known drink tequila is distilled. A deep valley with a small village at the very bottom opened up before our eyes. It was possible to observe the road as it descended and then, on the opposite hill, climbed again in many turns through a mountainous region, a region of tequila, a region of Jalisco. After passing this section of the road and several more miles through the Maguey Hacienda region, we approached Tequila, a small town, 20,464 inhabitants, located at an altitude of 3,995 feet, at the northern base of the extinct volcano Tequila, 9,800 feet. We wanted to stop here for a tour of a tequila factory, but we didn't. I don't know why. From here it was not far to the destination of our stage. Cacti still accompanied us, but suddenly we came across a highway, under construction, that assured us that Guadalajara was within reach. A beautiful, overall view of the city opened up before us, widely spread out on a plateau at an altitude of 5,220 feet. We turned off Highway 15 and bypassed the city. Here we came across a suburb of Guadalajara, 1,199,391 inhabitants, and a beautiful street lined with trees. Uniform houses of southern character were replaced by family villas of the wealthier. Traffic on the road quickly increased towards the city center. But then we spotted our campsite. We drove in, found a suitable place, and unpacked our gadgets. The campsite was again at a very good level. Oranges, tangerines, and other unknown fruits of the south hung on the campsite's trees. Of course, we tasted these gifts of Mother Nature. We had dinner, and then discussion again. Later, our neighbors came to visit us. An older Danish couple living in Toronto. It was quite lively, but fatigue from traveling soon took its toll, and so we gave up the gathering around 11 p.m. Guadalajara, December 21st. Sunday and beautiful weather. The last Sunday before the Christmas holidays, the proximity of which perplexes me. I simply cannot combine Christmas with summer. It's unusual and unpoetic, but it has already happened. Around 11 o'clock we set off for the city. We reached the narrower and less attractive streets of the city center via a neat avenue lined with trees whose species I cannot identify. We parked in a large square and from there we walked to the very heart of the city. It was very busy here, as in all Mexican cities. Ave Juarez led us towards Ave Alcalde, where the Plaza de Armas and the local cathedral are located, which is a mixture of several architectural styles: Byzantine, Greek, Gothic, and Arab. The construction was started in 1571. Its 2 towers, 70 m, were built in 1848. We only viewed the municipal palace and the State Museum from the outside. The Degollado Theater, located on a large square, was a very beautiful building. All these buildings give an impression of extraordinary age and cultural maturity. We continued on. We reached one of the city's main traffic arteries, Calzada Independencia, via smaller, dirty streets. The street was crowded with cars and the sidewalks with people. There was a small pedestrian bridge to facilitate crossing the street. On the other side was the famous Mercado Libertad, an incredible mix of human hustle and bustle. People sell, buy, eat, play, and sing here. It's enough to make your head spin. Stall after stall offers creations of the local cuisine. Everywhere is crowded, everywhere is bustling, everywhere something is happening. I was a bit overwhelmed. But then we too sat down for a small lunch to satisfy our hunger and refresh our senses. The food wasn't bad, but not great either. But what can you expect for only $4.80 for 6 people? Then we continued towards a place where we heard the sounds of music played by a group of musicians, guitars, violins, trumpets, generally called mariachis here. From Plaza de los Mariachis, we slowly returned to our car. We returned to the campsite, and after a little rest and frolicking, frisbee, we sat down for dinner. Then we talked about our impressions and plans for tomorrow. Around 10 p.m. someone knocked on the trailer door. I opened it. A Spanish-speaking man asked if we knew about the deceased man who had donated his body to the local university. I thought the man was joking, but unfortunately the opposite was the sad reality. Within the next few minutes, the body of a young American man was placed in an ambulance and taken away. The next morning, we found out that the young American, 26 years old, had died alone in his poor, rundown van from stomach cancer. Apparently, he only wanted to escape the white hospital walls and forget his illness under the hot sun of Mexico. Life and death. How hard to understand, how unfair. We rejoice here and nearby a man dies alone and lonely. May the earth rest lightly on him. It was hard for me to fall asleep that night, because I could not believe in death in the midst of spring. December 22nd. Yesterday we said goodbye to the Coopers, who decided to spend Christmas in Guadalajara. However, we had an invitation to Cuernavaca, where my good friend and former colleague from Mermaid now lives. Early in the morning, around 8 o'clock, we got up and left the campsite. I wanted to take a few pictures down in the city, but it didn't happen. I wasn't in the mood and the streets weren't filled with the pulsating hustle and bustle like yesterday. We decided to continue. We got a little lost in the growing traffic, but finally around 10 o'clock we found our way out. We continued on Highway 15. A few miles outside the city, a beautiful view of Lake Chapala opened up, surrounded by mighty hills. Small farms and settlements could be seen in the immediate vicinity of the lake. The land is cultivated thanks to the abundant water source of the lake. The road followed the shores of this small sea for 50 to 60 miles. It was very refreshing, as water sources on our journey through Mexico were almost non-existent. About halfway around Lake Chapala, we came across a small village called Tizapan, where we left the borders of the state of Jalisco and entered the territory of the state of Michoacán. The road gradually began to rise to respectable heights and again descend to the very foot of the mountains. It was one of the most beautiful stretches of our journey through Mexico. Beautiful views of the mountainous landscape and deep valleys. Distant views of the surrounding landscape covered with rich, evergreen forests. Very sparsely populated. Only here and there are poor, lonely dwellings and small settlements in the valleys. The road constantly twisted and turned in serpentine curves up and down. It was quite fun, but on the other hand slow, and our journey was long. I wasn't too worried about it. I was fully occupied with observing. But Zita got a little sick from the winding turns, so I stopped at the nearest scenic overlook. We ate a little and rested, then we continued on. Our beautiful journey finally led to the streets of the capital of the state of Michoacán, Morelia, 18,083 inhabitants, elevation 6,234 feet, founded in 1541. There was no time to stop here, so we only observed what we were allowed to see from the car windows. The local cathedral built between 1640 to 1744 did not escape our eyes. The local churches, temples and cathedrals are mostly a massive dominant feature of villages and towns. It is quite impossible to overlook them. We left Morelia, which was bathed in the lights of the setting sun. I suspected that the view of the surroundings would be fantastic, but by the time we climbed to the appropriate place in the hills, the beauty was gone. It was slowly getting dark. A few more miles through the mountainous landscape, and then the road became somewhat more reasonable. Around 8 p.m. we passed through the gates of Toluca, 239,261 inhabitants, elevation 8,712 feet, the capital of the state of Mexico. A busy commercial center located at a considerable altitude, which causes a somewhat cooler climate. We drove through several streets, and since the city seemed quite large, we asked the locals for directions to the Del Rey campsite. The campsite was located directly on Highway 15, towards Mexico City. We liked that very much. We stopped briefly at a shopping center. We bought some food and bread for ourselves and several bottles of spirits for our friend Arnold. Thus equipped, we got into the car and found our campsite. It was quite dead here. The campsite wasn't fully operational, I think. We ate a little. We also decided to take a shower, even though it was a really cold night. But we are already seasoned veterinarians. The difference in temperatures doesn't bother us too much. Then, of course, it was time for bed. Toluca, December 23rd. Around 8 o'clock we left the campsite. The weather was beautiful and sunny. A divided highway of very good quality quickly carried us towards Mexico City. Before we knew it, we were in the city. The 6-lane highway carried us through the suburbs of Mexico. The road sloped somewhat in gentle but frequent turns. The next few miles led us along a beautiful avenue lined with trees and the luxurious villas of the wealthy. Here, I think, we joined one of the main avenues of Mexico called Paseo de la Reforma, which leads through the city's popular amusement park Chapultepec Park. I saw a sign for tourist information. I turned in that direction, but there was no sign of any information. Only a theater institution, schools, and a large arena. We returned to the car and continued on. The traffic was rapidly increasing. I was really excited by what I saw. A wide avenue richly lined with trees, high-rise buildings, massive monuments, generally clean and fantastic hustle and bustle, as far as the eye could see. I was a little nervous because I wasn't sure of our route. However, the traffic was moving very slowly, so we had time to spot a sign towards Cuernavaca. From Paseo de la Reforma we turned right onto Insurgentes South Avenue. Shops, restaurants, hotels, residential buildings, a nice, lively artery of the city. It took us a good hour to fight our way through Mexico City to Highway 95D, which was a direct continuation of AV Insurgentes. We paid a toll of 10 pesos to use the highway and drove on. The road was almost exemplary. We stopped, had breakfast, and I changed into clean clothes. The journey led through a beautiful landscape of forests, fields, and mountains. Then a wide view of the region opened up before us. Somewhere below us lay Cuernavaca, as I gathered, since we only had a few miles left to travel. The road now descended rapidly towards our destination, Cuernavaca. We didn't know where to turn. By pure chance, however, we were very well directed to our destination by a local citizen. We found the street and house number of our friend Arnold, and knocked on the door. No one answered. I assumed that they, Arnold and Carmen, were probably out shopping. We waited. After about an hour, we finally greeted our hosts. We had lunch and talked a little about our impressions. Arnold had only arrived in Mexico a week ago, so he still had a lot of work to do settling into his new home. I helped a little. Zita and Carmen went shopping. Around 7 p.m. we had dinner, talked, and since we were all a little tired, we went to our bedrooms. Cuernavaca, December 24, 1975 to January 2, 1976. We woke up to a sunny morning. Beautiful warm weather. It's hard to believe that today we will be celebrating Christmas Eve. Physically I was here, but in spirit at home in Prague. There was very little Christmas atmosphere here. I helped Arnold install a new stereo, which I really enjoyed. However, it took us quite a long time to figure out all the requirements for proper connection. The stereo played perfectly. Around afternoon, Carmen's sister and her husband arrived. Very nice people. We talked and listened to the radio. Around 8 p.m. we had a small refreshment. Potato salad, ham, eggs and tomatoes, a little wine. How unusual! Then we danced. Before midnight we got into the car and drove to the city. We wanted to go to midnight mass, but to our surprise, most of the churches were closed. The last option, Cuernavaca Cathedral. It was open and festively lit. We parked. Two shabby, drunk men tried to help with parking and opening the car door. They obviously wanted to earn a few pesos. But I think they were overlooked. The cathedral, founded perhaps in the 16th century, looked majestic and extraordinarily old. In the gates as well as on the way to the main entrance of the cathedral, the pleading, withered hands of beggars, mostly women, rose from poor piles of rags. We passed through this avenue of suffering. Our host paid no attention to this theater, so I followed suit. However, it made me feel a little sick. A bitter sight that will hardly fade from my memory. The cathedral was filled with worshippers. The ancient walls were very simply decorated with original paintings, here and there damaged by time, some were renovated, elsewhere connected to contemporary art. Everything was very simply and plainly furnished, apparently thanks to the Bishop of Cuernavaca, Sergio Mendez Arcio. It is said that he is left-wing and likes to intertwine political views with pious contemplation. I think it is really needed in Mexico, because I have not seen so much misery and poverty in my entire life as here in a few weeks. We waited for a while, then the bells rang and to the music of the mariachis, a procession of altar servers, priests and Bishop Arcio entered. Everyone dressed in simple white robes. Arcio's bishop's staff was only a roughly hewn stick. Truly unusual, considering that it is a Roman Catholic church. The whole ceremony was more than interesting, especially the music of the mariachis made the whole ceremony extraordinary. The drums and high tones of the whistles were reminiscent of the sounds of the ancient Aztec culture. Otherwise, however, the music flowed through the vaults of the temple in fresh Mexican rhythms. Our friend Philip was asked by one of the altar servers to participate in the Mass. It is said to be customary for one of the believers to be chosen for direct participation and cooperation with the priest. The ceremony was over. It was one of the most interesting experiences of our travels. The ancient courtyard awaited us with Bishop Arcio, who personally spoke with many and shook hands. Zita, of course, had to have a conversation too. Afterwards, a hot punch awaited us, which was very pleasant, as Cuernavaca nights are very cold. I met Mrs. Voskova, daughter and mother, here. Mrs. Voskova, mother, was a spry and lively 96-year-old, and her daughter taught somewhere in the United States. It was a very interesting conversation with them. Shortly after, we said goodbye, wished them a happy and Merry Christmas, and returned home. Jezusek, Santa Claus, awaited us here. We received a bottle of tequila, a record, and Zita nice dark blue pants. We must have been good. We talked for a while and then went to bed. The next day I started working again on restoring the table and 3 chairs. I wanted to do something, because I don't like just being a guest. It was a rough and somewhat dirty job, but after a few days I finished the work. Otherwise we lived in peace and quiet. Every day we went somewhere to see the sights. Chapultepec Park, the city center, Cortez Palace, and so on. But the days passed quickly and the last day of the year was already here. It was agreed with Philip and Rebecca that we would spend New Year's Eve in Mexico City. Around 3 p.m. we got into the Volvo and went to the capital. We found the address, parked and entered a small tenement house. The furnishings were somewhat primitive, but the apartments were quite nice. We had dinner and drank a little, dancing and music until midnight. At midnight we wished each other a prosperous new year and shortly after went to bed. It was a rather cheerless new year, but oh well, we are here for tourist reasons, so let's forget the old traditions of excessive revelry and drinking. In the morning we had breakfast and then we went for a short tour of the city. The luxurious district of the wealthy, a beautiful church, and the old quarter of Mexico. Then we said goodbye to Philip and Rebecca and drove back to Cuernavaca. We were a little tired so we went to bed a little earlier. We planned our departure for tomorrow, but we stayed another day in the hope that we would receive some mail. But it was high time for our departure. I was already longing for something new and also missed the freedom of decision-making. Cuernavaca, January 3rd. We weren't wrong. Zita and I both received news from home that really pleased us. We said goodbye to Arnold and Carmen and drove to the city center to film a few selected places. However, the cameras I saw differently. I wasn't satisfied. I didn't film anything, and in addition, the police removed the license plate from my car. I was really angry. However, we settled the matter without paying a fine, because the parking meter was damaged. We drove towards the cathedral. I took a few pictures of this place, and then we found out that the tower and roof of the cathedral are open for viewing. From there was a truly fantastic view of the whole city and the surrounding area. It was our farewell. From there we drove on Road 95 towards Mexico City. Highway 95 is only two-way and somewhat twisty, but it is free, without paying a toll of 10 pesos. The landscape is really beautiful. We are driving here for the fourth time and there is still something to see. Near Mexico, we stop at a scenic overlook to film Ixta and Popo. Both volcanoes finally calmed down and revealed their beauty, often hidden in white clouds. From there it was only a short hop to Mexico. We reached the campsite via Insurgentes and Universidad Avenue, where we had a rendezvous with the Coopers. They weren't home, so we went for a short walk. After about 2 hours we finally met. We talked about our latest impressions and experiences. The Coopers decided to go out for dinner somewhere, so we were orphaned. Around 9 p.m. we were summoned for a conversation with the campsite owner. Madam, originally American, was very indignant that our car was on her property without us paying. I don't know exactly what agreement was reached. We paid something around 20 pesos, so I parked the car on the street, believing that everything would be fine now. It wasn't, so Gary and I agreed that we would move elsewhere. Zita didn't want to sleep in front of the campsite gates, so around midnight we roamed the streets of Mexico back and forth. Finally we found a suitable place and lay down for a well-deserved sleep. It was quite a cold night. Mexico City, January 4th to January 8th. In the morning, we returned to our friends. They were awake. Everything was ready for departure. We set off towards Cuernavaca. There, where Highway 95D and 95 fork, is a rather nice campsite where we got a good deal. We had breakfast, washed up, and in the afternoon we planned to visit the bullfights. Mexico City is the best place in Mexico for bullfights. Plaza Monumental is the largest arena in the world, 50,000 spectators, often called Plaza Mexico. The second arena is El Toro. We visited the Plaza Mexico arena. Bullfights are the only spectacle in Mexico that starts precisely on the 2nd. The arena was full. An extraordinarily colorful sight of the human hustle and bustle inside the circular structure of the arena. I was a bit upset, the sun was scorching, and the dried blood in some places of the ring foreshadowed death. Precisely at 4 p.m., the fanfare of the corrida resounded. Through the entrance gates marched all those who participated in the bullfights, toreadors, picadors, and those who only helped with the maintenance of the ring. Immediately afterwards, the weight of the bull is announced, and in the following minute, it is released into the arena. Beautiful animals full of muscles and strength, whose blinded combativeness is their downfall. The bull is initially only teased by about 4 men, so that the toreador can recognize its abilities, visual and temperamental. The toreador now presents himself, with several bolder elements of the fight. Then the picadors, too, enter on horseback. The horses are richly adorned or wrapped in protective rubber gear. And here begins the bloody spectacle. The picadors try to inflict only one wound on the animal's back. Deep, painful, and bloody. Often, however, it happens that the bull catches the horse and picador on its horns and throws them to the ground. 2 wounds to the back of the animal's neck are finally inflicted. The picadors immediately clear the ring. Blood gushes from the animal's open wounds and flows in streams down its neck. And again, the bull is teased by several of the toreador's helpers. The toreador himself again presents himself with several daring acts, which make one's blood run cold. It is an extraordinarily dangerous performance. Now, the bull is inflicted with further wounds in the form of 6 decorated blades. In pairs, they are inserted into the bull's neck. The animal rages, but also weakens from blood loss. And now comes the most important moment of the corrida. The bull is solely the toreador's. The toreador tries to show off the most bravura details of his craft. Crouching, behind his back, and in front of the toreador's eyes, 500 to 800 kilograms of enraged muscles armed with 2 sharp horn tips rush every now and then. It almost makes one feel sick. Finally, the animal is somewhat exhausted. The front legs are somewhat splayed, and the head almost touches the ground. This is the toreador's true moment. He steps in front of the bull, reveals the sharp steel of his weapon, and with lightning speed tries to strike the heart. With a good hit, the entire steel, up to the hilt, plunges into the animal's entrails. A few more moments of ebbing life, and the bull falls to the ground. If the toreador's performance was more than good, he is rewarded with the end of the animal's tail or ears. In the case of a perfect performance, he gets both. The animal is now dragged out of the arena by a pair of horses. A new bull is announced, and the whole spectacle is repeated. Usually, 6 bulls are killed by 3 toreadors in the span of 2 to 2.5 hours. Often, however, it happens that the toreador pays for too much bravado in this game. This happened in our case. A young, ambitious, and already popular toreador tried to prove his qualities with excessive courage, and before our eyes, he paid dearly for it. He was caught on the horns and thrown into the air. Fortunately, the enraged bull did not attack further. However, the toreador was seriously injured. Yet, to the applause of the entire audience, he was able to kill the bull. Well, hot blood and pride in one's profession. This time with a happy ending. We returned home. We were all a bit exhausted by this uneven fight, had dinner, and went to bed. In the morning, we left for the city. We wanted to arrange visas for Guatemala. For a fee of $5, the requested visas were issued. Gary had some errands to run for repairs, so Zita and I set out to see the beauties of the city. From the El Cabalito Monument, we slowly walked along Ave Juarez towards La Alameda Park. We saw the Palace of Fine Arts, and from there, along 5 de Mayo Street towards the Cathedral and the Presidential Palace. I took a few photos here and we rested a bit. From there, we slowly returned via Ave Madero, where the tallest building in Mexico stands, the Latino Americana Tower, back to El Cabalito, where we were supposed to meet Gary. Then we returned to the campsite. The next day was dedicated to the Museum of Anthropology, which preserves valuable artifacts of the ancient Aztec and Mayan cultures. It was an overall very interesting day. It's just a shame that the explanations are only written in Spanish. The museum building is an example of modern architecture. It's just a shame that tripods are not allowed here. It would certainly make for interesting shots. At noon, we stopped for a small lunch in the very nice restaurant here. We chose the cheapest meal and were really satisfied. Gary came to the museum around 2 p.m. They had been here once before, but came again. We managed to see the museum in one day. Around 7 p.m., we returned to the campsite. Early in the morning, we left Mexico City towards San Juan Teotihuacan, one of the most famous archaeological sites in Mexico. This site occupies approximately 35 square miles. The dominant features here are the pyramids of the sun and moon. San Juan Teotihuacan was a religious center, probably built by people called Teotihuacanos. It was inhabited by Toltec and Aztec tribes. Archaeologists estimate that Teotihuacan had around 125,000 inhabitants, making this city the largest city in the world at its time. We climbed the Pyramid of the Moon via steep, high steps, from where there was a good view. Between the Pyramids of the Moon and La Ciudadela at the opposite end runs the Avenue of the Dead, named so for the many skeletons discovered beneath the surface of this street. The magnitude of the entire complex is truly surprising. It was really difficult to see even roughly the most important parts of Teotihuacan. However, I was satisfied with what I saw. Around 5 p.m., we returned to the road to Mexico City. It was also high time, as we had tickets to the theater, for Mexican folk dances. But we were thirsty and hungry, so we stopped at a restaurant for a small refreshment. We returned to the Palace of Fine Arts shortly after the start of the performance. It was a very interesting performance, representing dances from various states of Mexico. Playful, dashing, and cheerful, some reflected the rhythms and sounds of ages long past, Aztec period, in a turbulent and evocative tempo, or the rhythm of the tam-tam and flutes. The theater itself is a mix of architectures, Mayan, Mixtec, classical, whose construction began in 1900. It is richly decorated with marble, whose weight and, on the other hand, soft foundations, have caused the theater to sink into the depths of the earth. From completion to the present day, the difference is almost 4 m. The journey home and to sleep. It's our last day in Mexico City. We visited the local university and once again tried to get permission, tripod, for filming in the Museum of Anthropology. Without success. However, we watched a short, circular, but beautiful film about the USA and the beauties of this country, which is celebrating its bicentennial this year. Then we drove along one of the main boulevards of Mexico City, Paseo de la Reforma, built according to the famous Parisian model of the Champs-Élysées. We stopped at the Independence Monument where I took a few photos, and from there we continued towards Chapultepec Park and Chapultepec Castle, where the Museum of History is located. A beautiful building, but currently under general renovation. There was a wonderful view of all of Mexico City. We also saw the building of modern art and the Bolívar Monument, and from there along Reforma and Insurgentes back to the campsite. The traffic was really heavy. It's almost unbelievable, but it's true. Mexico City has no highway system to speed up traffic through the city. After about 2 hours, we reached our destination. Mexico City, January 9th. We left Mexico City around 10 a.m. via Highway 95 towards Cuernavaca. For the 5th time, we cruised this nice road with distant views. Once again, only briefly, we visited our friends and received our mail. We drove through the streets of Cuernavaca, and outside the city I met up with Gary, who was already waiting for us. Together we set off on our next journey. We passed through the small town of Cuautla and joined Highway 160, which led through a gently undulating landscape. Sparsely populated. Popo and Ixta revealed their majestic beauty from time to time, dominating the vast landscape. The southern slopes of Popo were very modestly covered with snow. I think we weren't mistaken, Popo was smoking. Soon after, we left the state of Morelos and entered the territory of the state of Puebla. We passed through the lively town of Izúcar and continued south. The landscape basically didn't change. Here and there fields and a small settlement, in the distance still Popo. Around 5 p.m., we passed through the town of Acatlan and only glimpsed a nice church with blue towers while driving. A few miles past Acatlan, we stopped near a cement factory, which was not in operation, so we used the spacious parking lot to park Gary's Airstream. Several children gathered around us, and we chatted a bit, as much as my abilities allowed. Cold night. Acatlin, January 10th. We left our post and continued on Highway 190. At first, we drove through a plateau, here and there overgrown with palm trees. Popo can still be seen. We entered the territory of the state of Oaxaca. The road began to get a little rough with steep ascents and descents, sharp turns, as we were moving forward. Beautiful views of the surrounding countryside. The air is crystal clear. The earth is reddish-brown in many places. A few more miles and we have a view of the capital of the state of Oaxaca, Oaxaca, enclosed by mighty walls of mountains. We drove down into the city and looked for the local campsite. It was a bit expensive, so we left the Volvo outside the gates. We rested a bit, and then we all got into Gary's car and went to see the city center. It was market day, Saturday, so we mingled in this human crowd, where people sell, buy, and eat. It is extraordinarily colorful, lively, local, and typical. I like to observe this activity, but I also get tired of it quite quickly. We stopped here for lunch. I was very reluctant to sit down at the table of one kiosk. But I have to submit to the majority. Besides, I was so hungry I could eat a horse. We ordered soup and ate it with tortillas, flatbreads made from corn flour. It wasn't worth much, but we didn't pay much for it. Okay. We made a small purchase and then watched life in one of the squares. Sellers of ponchos and various blankets tried to sell their products. Shoe shiners and ordinary people and youth, all in one mixture of shouts and street noise. Around 8 p.m., we returned home. We ate and went to bed. Oaxaca, January 11th to January 12th. I decided to continue writing my diary. We drove to the Juarez Monument, a popular and beloved statesman who was born in the nearby mountains. I parked in the shade of the trees, from where there was a beautiful view of the city below us, and I started writing. I'm really behind. I wrote several pages, but a policeman interrupted us, so we started a conversation. He was a pleasant man, proud of belonging to the state of Oaxaca, which he claimed was the soul of Mexico. Proud of his countrymen, the famous Juarez, proud of his people. Then I continued my writing again. Around 5 p.m., we decided to take a short drive around the city, which seemed very nicely laid out to me. In the evening, we returned to the square, where 9 musicians were playing music on the marimba, a wooden musical instrument similar to a xylophone or vibraphone. Extraordinarily rhythmic and melodic songs of Mexico, some known, others new to me. We listened all evening, then we went to a restaurant, and were very disappointed for 19 pesos. That's life. We returned to the campsite and went to bed. Together with Gary, we went to see the Monte Alban ruins, which lie on the top of a mountain, approximately 9 kilometers southwest of Oaxaca. A narrow, steeply ascending road led us to this religious, or ecclesiastical, city, which was built many centuries ago by Indians of the Zapotec tribe. The entire structure of this city is dominated by the huge, Great Plaza, 330 m long, 220 meters wide, which is surrounded by 4 platforms. Archaeologists are working here on the overall reconstruction of this complex. A magnificent view in all directions. Unfortunately, I was again unsuccessful with my filming. We spent almost the whole day here. At dusk, we returned to the campsite. We showered, ate, and went to sleep. Oaxaca, January 13th. We waited impatiently for the bank to open, as we had no money. There was a long queue at the bank, so we wasted a lot of time. Finally, we were ready to leave. We continued on Highway 190. After 24 miles, we stopped in Mitla. Near a small church stands a beautiful tree, perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 years old. It is said that Cortez rested in the shade of its huge crown. And it is said to be one of the oldest living things in Mexico. We continue on, through a mountainous landscape, very sparsely populated. Below us, a wide valley opened up, drained by the Tehuantepec River. Lush green in contrast to the dry surrounding mountainous landscape. We drove through this fresh valley of greenery and palms and continued through the mountainous landscape, here and there planted with the cactus-like maguey plant. Distant views. The road began to descend towards the city of Tehuantepec, before whose gates a mighty lake spread out. I heard it was a dam. It was hot, as we headed towards the Pacific coast. Plains, cultivated fields, and groves of palms. A very different landscape from everything we had seen so far. We drove through this unusual greenery and the city itself, and continued towards Jucutan, which lies on the very shores of the Golfo de Tehuantepec. From there, Highway 190 continues almost directly, a good, fast road, but through the hot lowlands towards Tuxtla Gutierrez, Chiapas. It was already dark when we stopped at a large building and asked if we could spend the night here. Permission was granted. Tuxtla, Chiapas, January 14th. In the morning, we drove down into the city. Tuxtla, 80,000 inhabitants, 1,749 feet, is the capital of the state of Chiapas. A modern, nicely organized city and an important distribution center for the surrounding coffee and tobacco plantations. We stopped for a small purchase of groceries, but it was quite hot here, so I hurried so that we could continue on. After about 10 to 20 miles through open countryside, the road began to climb rapidly. In one of the sharp turns, traffic was stopped for 30 minutes or more for road repairs. From our spot, there was a wide view of the surrounding area, so I used this break to observe the world below me. Traffic started moving again. We climbed higher and higher on a nice road. Beautiful views, cool, clean air. Along the way, we passed shy Indians, usually carrying large bundles with contents unknown to me. In 50 miles, 80 kilometers, we overcame a height difference of 5,338 feet, 1,700 meters. It was a beautiful journey that took us to a small town of Spanish character, San Cristobal Las Casas, 32,833 inhabitants, 7,087 feet. The town is mainly inhabited by Indians. Gary had a problem with the police here because he parked in the wrong place. His car number was taken away, so he had to go to the police station, pay 100 pesos, and only then could we set off for further driving. I don't think it's very polite to tourists, but that's the way it is. The road descended from the mountain heights into a somewhat looser, open landscape, on whose distant horizons unusual shapes of mountains loomed. I thought these were the gateway to Central America, and as I later found out, I was not mistaken. Farewell, Mexico. The Mexican authorities processed us very quickly, and behind the barrier, the border authorities of Guatemala, located in the small settlement of La Mesilla, were already waiting for us. We had Guatemalan visas in our passports, but we still paid, entry and exit, a total of $19. I was really outraged, but nothing could be done. It's a bit ridiculous, but they disinfected our car wheels and confiscated all the fruits and vegetables we brought from Mexico. Finally, we were done with all the customs procedures. However, it was quite late, so we decided to spend the night here. For $1.50, we had dinner at a local restaurant and chatted a bit with the locals. Then it was time for a well-deserved sleep. The night was quite warm. La Mesilla, January 15th. Around 10 a.m., we were ready for the road. We drove perhaps a mile and I stopped to film this interesting landscape. We were driving through a canyon, at the bottom of which a small river flowed. We were surrounded by high hills, covered with lush vegetation, and here and there, water gushed from the surrounding rocks in thin silver threads. Very sparsely populated and almost no road traffic, but we often see pedestrians along the road. There are many Indians here, in their tribal costumes, but they are shy and I don't think they speak Spanish. The journey slowly progresses, as there is much to see. The landscape is very fresh and as if embellished by human hands. The road climbs again, finally smaller settlements can be seen, poor, but very clean and tidy. The same goes for the terraced fields that climb to the tops of the hills. A very pleasant surprise. Suddenly, however, the sky was shrouded in mists and gray clouds. We were perhaps at an altitude of 9,000 feet. Coniferous trees replaced the lush vegetation. Finally, we broke through the bad weather into better conditions. Below us, we saw the town of San Cristobal, on the outskirts of which we later passed, on our way further. We met 2 Canadians here, at a crossroads, who worked here as translators. We exchanged greetings, and I forgot to fill up with gas, so for a considerable part of the journey I lived in fear of whether we would come across a gas station in time. I think we saw the city of Totonicapán, so I rejoiced at the success. Prematurely, however. Totonicapán lies on another road, and in a few moments we completely deviated from this town. Again we climbed through the sparsely populated landscape towards Sierra de los Desconsuelos to a height of around 9,500 feet. Finally, we saw the shimmering surface of Lake Atitlan, surrounded by 4 mighty volcanoes. We entered the small town of Solola. The road is somewhat congested by perhaps 100 Indians, all dressed the same. A funeral. We drove through slowly. From Solola, a narrow, steeply descending road leads towards Panajacal, which lies on the very shores of Lake Atitlan. We made a small purchase and from there went straight to the water, where we pitched our tent. For quite a long time I just observed this beautiful lake and its majestic surroundings. We also chatted a bit with the neighbors, had dinner, and went to sleep again. But not for long. Around 11 p.m., we were woken up by the police and warned that camping here is not allowed, fine $50. We packed up and drove to a nearby campsite and tried to fall asleep again. Panajacal, January 16th. We woke up early in the morning. The camping fee was $2.50, and I only had a $100 check. They let us go. We decided to go to Solola for a small shopping and, mainly, to exchange American money for Guatemalan currency. It was unusually busy here because there was a market today. Then we returned to Panajacal. To the right of the main road was the entrance to one of the nice hotels in this area. We went out for breakfast, $1, and then I filmed a few views of the lake. I returned to the beach, but there was no sign of Gary. He must have left last night as well, even though he had permission from the local travel agency. I washed a few things, cleaned myself up, and then sunbathed and waited for Gary. He arrived around 3 p.m., parked somewhere behind Solola. We were all a bit thirsty and hungry, so we went to a local restaurant for lunch. We paid around $2 for a very tasty meal and a few beers. We stayed until sunset. I then drove towards Solola to one of the viewing platforms and waited for the right moment to film the lake from this spot. However, the sunset wasn't very pretty. From there, I returned to the place where Gary had parked his Airstream. We had dinner, and around 10 p.m., we went to our respective bedrooms. Solola, January 17th. I almost forgot to describe Lake Atitlan. It is said to be one of the most beautiful lakes in the world. I think it depends on taste. I have seen more beautiful lakes. Atitlan is located at an elevation of 5,200 feet, surrounded by several volcanoes. Atitlan Volcano, 11,565 feet, San Pedro, 9,921 feet, and Talaman, 10,276 feet. The lake is 10 miles wide and 20 miles long, with a depth reaching 1,500 feet in some places. Around 9 a.m., we were organized for the next leg of our journey. We left Solola and joined the Inter-American Highway again. The road sloped somewhat towards the capital. We caught a few more glimpses of the volcano peaks surrounding Lake Atitlan and the lake itself. The road then turned east. There was a bit more traffic. The settlements we passed now were not as orderly as before. It was cloudy and drizzling when we first got a view of Guatemala City from a roadside overlook. We didn't stay long. The road, descending for several miles, reached the gates of the Republic's capital. It was busy here. The police were checking some cars. There I spotted a Skoda. I couldn't believe my eyes. But there were more of them, and as I figured, the sale of these cars must have started recently, as they were all new. I was really pleased about that, especially since Guatemala seems quite selective. I saw mostly good cars here: Mercedes, BMW, Volvo, Citroën. We drove through many different districts without knowing where we were going, as I was following Gary. Then we reached poorer suburbs and from there back to the city and other more luxurious neighborhoods. Finally, Gary parked at a gas station. Spacious and clean. We decided that Zita and I would prepare dinner for Gary's family as well, since we are often invited to share their table. So we went to the market. It was really like a beehive here, lots of vendors, stalls, dozens of buses bringing and taking away villagers from the surrounding area. I didn't dare leave the car in this chaos, so Zita went shopping alone. She returned in about an hour. I was already impatient. Then we returned to our spot, and Zita started cooking. Dinner was quite successful. Guatemala City, January 18th. I caught a cold and wasn't feeling well. I ate a little and took 2 aspirins, as it's very inconvenient to be sick. I lay in the car almost all day. Gary was busy changing the oil and washing the trailer, the women were reading, and Gary's 2 boys were writing in their diaries. It was a quiet day, without the slightest excitement. The Coopers went out for dinner, so we were able to prepare dinner at their place. I felt a little better. We waited for their return, and around 10 p.m., we all went to sleep. January 19th. We left our spot around 10 a.m. It was a sunny day. We drove through some less attractive streets of the suburbs and were soon out of the city. The sun was rising. We stopped on one of the hills to take one last look at the city, surrounded by many peaks and several majestic volcanoes. The road was generally very good, winding through the hilly landscape. Palm trees and sugarcane plantations, very sparse settlement. Behind the town of Cuilapa, which we pass, we crossed the Rio Los Esclavos over the new Baltazar de Orina bridge. A few dozen more miles, and we stop in Valle Nuevo, where we are processed by the Guatemalan authorities. Guatemala, as I mentioned earlier, was a really pricey affair. We crossed Rio de Paz, and in El Jobo, we stopped at the El Salvador border authorities. We were granted visas without any problems, and within a few more minutes, we were cruising through the countryside of the smallest Central American country, El Salvador, 8,061 square miles, 3.2 million inhabitants. This country is very densely populated. Many villages and settlements line the good but slow, significant traffic highway that climbed and descended through the mountainous region. Coffee and banana plantations, palm trees. But I like the trees with canary yellow flowers the most. Many stalls selling fruit. We passed through Santa Ana, 86,800 inhabitants, the second largest city in the republic, a center for trade in coffee from the surrounding plantations. The remaining 42 miles towards the capital were marked by lively traffic on the road and in the many settlements lining our route. Finally, we came across the suburbs of San Salvador Santa Tecla. A 4-lane, divided highway carried us through a nice suburb. Surprisingly nice. I was really impressed. Everything was clean and tidy. I would say it's one of the most beautiful cities in Central America. But we only passed through this time. We'll stop here on the way back. We parked at one of the gas stations. It was a really nice spot, so we thought we'd play soccer. Keith and Carl played against Zita and me. Of course, we won, but I was exhausted for the day. We had dinner together, and then we went to bed. I slept soundly. San Salvador, January 20th. About 5 miles east of the city, we drive through a tunnel that goes under the runway of Ilopango Airport. The landscape is hilly, fertile. We are proceeding quite quickly towards the border of Honduras. The road gradually descends. We pass through the city of San Miguel, 73,000 inhabitants, which is a center for the industry processing cotton and sisal from the surrounding plantations. After a few more miles, we entered the territory of Honduras. The entry procedure is again quite quick and without problems. The section of the Inter-American Highway running through Honduras is 94 miles long. The road leads mainly through the lowlands, hot, and a generally very poor region. Sparsely populated by poor people from Choluteca, 13 feet. The highway begins to climb towards San Marcos de Colón, 4,500 feet. Nice views of the sea and a few volcanoes. At the Honduras border, there was surprisingly a free shop, so I bought a carton of Kent's, $3. I don't think we went through any checks. In Nicaragua, however, there was extraordinary chaos. Dozens of buses, trucks, and cars, and hundreds of people waiting to be processed. The guys almost turned us back because we didn't have visas. But then we agreed on transit visas. It was hot, and the processing buildings were more than makeshift. I almost felt sorry for those guys behind the typewriters. They were sweating profusely. We were delayed here for more than an hour. Finally, overwhelmed by the heat, we were allowed into Nicaragua. Very sparsely populated, the road initially drops several thousand feet, but then rises again to 5,500 feet. From there, it descended definitively towards Managua. Huge plantations of bananas and cotton. We arrived at the gates of Managua at nightfall and stopped at the first gas station, where we also spent the night. There was an unpleasant humid heat that we tried, Gary and I, to overcome with several bottles of beer. But in vain. Managua, January 21st. We woke up to stuffy, humid heat. We decided to stop to buy some food, as our supplies were dwindling dangerously. Gary damaged one of the trailer's tires while parking, so we were delayed a bit. We didn't visit Managua itself, we continued on our way. The surroundings around Lake Nicaragua were very beautiful. The Concepcion volcano rises and smokes from an island in the lake. In Penas Blancas, we say goodbye to Nicaragua and enter the territory of Costa Rica. A pleasant change. It's really civilized here. Zita and I received visas without any problems, but our American friends had difficulties this time. They were somewhat indignant. After about an hour of waiting, their visas were finally granted. However, they had to pay perhaps $9. Immediately upon entering Costa Rica, one feels the change. A few miles of excellent highway and a landscape that looks as if it were cultivated by human hands. The landscape retained its beautiful appearance, but the road turned into sheer hell for a stretch of perhaps 20 miles, La Cruz. Potholes in the road, perhaps 20 centimeters deep. I drove into these holes a few times, but the Michelins are exceeding my expectations so far. The road finally straightened out and continued decently. But I'm running out of gas, and there's no sign of a gas station. Very sparsely populated. The engine sputtered its last, and we stopped. I refueled from my own reserves and continued on. About 500 minutes later, a gas station. I was out of luck this time. We continued through a gently rolling landscape of pastures where herds of cattle were grazing. Finally, the road rises to an elevation of around 750 feet. A much more pleasant climate. It's really impossible to live in the lowlands. The sun was setting. We crossed the Barrancas River when I saw Gary stopping. We'll probably spend the night here. A local man is waving at us to turn off to his hacienda. Free entry. I accept the invitation, but Gary's Airstream can't make this journey. The road is too steep. I tried to change the oil, but it got dark, so I gave up. Gary invited me for a beer again. A few local men joined our group. Very pleasant people, very proud of their country. They offered us beer and gave me a pack of cigarettes. It was quite a party, that ended around 11 p.m. One of our new friends insisted that we had to spend the night near his house, as parking by the road is dangerous, drunk drivers, so we packed up and moved. It was a starry night, so we spent some time observing this world of mysteries, then went to sleep. San Ramon, January 22nd. It was hot again. Gary offered to help me change the oil. I didn't want to at first, but Gary insisted, so I relented. This operation didn't take long. Then we went to the hacienda for a refreshing drink. We chatted a bit more and then said goodbye to everyone. We were invited to stop by on the way back. We gratefully accepted. The road climbed to an elevation of around 3,500 feet. It was much more pleasant here. Behind San Ramon, we came across a luxurious highway that quickly carried us towards the capital. And we soon reached the suburbs of San Jose. The traffic was smooth. I spotted a huge Volvo sign in one of the side streets. I don't know if it was a service center for cars or trucks, but my Volvo is running well, so I didn't try to find out more details. We got to the city center, a very nice city, a good competitor to San Salvador. But we continue on, as there is no place to park here. Gary stopped at a gas station and learned that there was a campsite outside the city. I took a look at the new Volvo model, the 264, quite a beauty. But probably hard to come by in Costa Rica. The price is between $20,000 to $25,000. We found the campsite without much trouble and agreed with the owner on a reasonable price. We washed our laundry here, took showers, and prepared dinner for ourselves and the two boys. Gary and Ida went out for dinner again. We also had a very interesting conversation with the campsite owner, who had visited practically all of South America. Her stories were really very interesting. She had a sense of humor. Then we played a quite interesting game with Keith and Carl. But Gary returned after 2 hours, so it was time to go to bed. San Jose, January 23rd. It was a sunny morning and, you could say, hot. We slowly got ready to leave. We chatted a bit with the campsite residents, and then it was high time to leave. It was around 12 o'clock when we left the gates of our site. The traffic was a bit busy, but the road was very good. About 11 miles outside San Jose, at an elevation of 5,048 feet, we crossed the Continental Divide. On our left, we pass Cartago. The road starts to get rough, climbing a bit in serpentines to the highest point of the Inter-American Highway Cerro de la Muerte, 10,935 feet, 38 miles of road to this point, through the Sierra de Talamanca mountain range. Lush vegetation gradually decreases with increasing altitude, beautiful views of the landscape. Only occasional human, mostly indigenous, dwellings. We stopped near Cerro de la Muerte, 11,006 feet, to view the valley, mountains, and clouds that rushed past us. An extraordinary view from these heights, guarded only by eagles. A few more miles of climbing, and we drive down. We quickly descend into areas of rainforests. Extraordinarily lush, deep green vegetation. What does it hide within, humid and hot? We drove through clouds that shrouded everything in a milky veil. Finally, we freed ourselves from this embrace. A wide view of the gently rolling landscape, almost flat in the distance. We drive through a fairly busy settlement called San Isidro del General, 2,296 feet. It's hot. Gary's Airstream, as usual, attracts considerable attention. We drove through the town and continued on a good road, surrounded by smaller plantations of sugar cane, banana trees, and other crops. After 40 miles, we stopped at a gas station. It's broken. But there's another one right next to it. We refueled. There was plenty of space here. It was getting late, so we decided to spend the night here. Distant mountains looked down on us from their heights. The co-owner of the gas station talked to us about his country. Costa Ricans are very proud of their homeland, which they say is the most beautiful in all of Central America. I think they're right. Our new friend also introduced us to his wife, an indigenous woman, and son, of whom he was very proud. Around 9 p.m., we said goodbye, had a little dinner. We slowly fell asleep to the sound of cicadas. It was a hot night. Buenos Aires, January 24th. We had breakfast, looked around a bit. I saw grasshoppers, a good 10 centimeters long and as thick as a Cuban cigar, and thought about a quick departure, as the morning sun alone drove the temperatures up to perhaps 25 degrees Celsius. The Inter-American Highway continued through the lowlands, sea level, perhaps around 100 feet, lushly covered with tropical vegetation. I couldn't stand the heat in the car anymore, so I used the air conditioning for perhaps the first time. It was more than pleasant. The surrounding landscape also seemed more pleasant. We entered a valley through which the General River and then the Turaba flowed. In the section between Plataneres and Palmar Norte, 33 miles, the road conditions deteriorated significantly. The road was paved, but full of holes. I ended up in these traps a few times, but fortunately, nothing happened. The Michelins are proving their high quality. Beyond the Palmar Norte community, 66 feet, the road behaved again. We left the river and the valley and entered the open country of the sparsely populated coastal plain. I think it was in Rio Claro that Gary turned off the road to refuel in this town. Hot. The car body was so hot at that moment that I could barely touch it. This kind of weather is real hell for me, but we're moving on again. A few last miles in Costa Rica, and we stop at the border of the last Central American country, Panama. We had some trouble here. They said they didn't have tourist cards, that we had to go back to Costa Rica for visas, etc., etc. Or, they said, $50 would allow us entry into this country. We didn't give up, and finally, the missing tourist cards were discovered. The authorities of most Central American republics tried to earn a little extra. We paid perhaps $2 per person, and the Panamanian gates were open to us. We moved our watches forward 1 hour, EST, and set off on the first kilometers through Panama. Gary had a passenger, one of the customs officials, who asked him for a ride home. A fairly good concrete road carried us through a not very interesting region. The settlement was almost non-existent. Before David, 35,486 alt. 153 feet, we are greeted by a sign. Yankee go home. Panama wants the canal zone back. We pass through David, the main city of the Chiriquí province. Agriculture, rice, coffee, bananas, and cattle breeding predominate. A small, busy, and dirty city. We cleared our way through the traffic, and we continued on. The landscape is somewhat hillier. Somewhere beyond David, we turn off the main road. After a few miles, Gary stops. The customs officer is home. He waves goodbye, and we return to the Inter-American Highway. We cross many rivers, Chiriquí, San Juan, Tabasara, and San Pablo. Closer to Santiago, we drive again through an almost uninhabited landscape with distant views of the surroundings. Hilly landscape, 1,100 feet. My supplies of gasoline are rapidly dwindling, and there's no sign of a gas station. The last sputter, and we stop. Gary, as usual, far ahead of us, has no idea. Several attentive drivers, one of them was the owner of a new Volvo, stop and offer help. But we have gasoline with us. After a few minutes, we continued. Perhaps 10 miles separated us from the gas station in Santiago, where I refueled and parked right across the street for the night. It cooled down a bit. Good night. Santiago, January 25th. It was Sunday. We stood at the threshold of the penultimate stage through Central America. We had breakfast and set off towards Panama City. The concrete road, in good condition, led us further and further. About 80 miles to the settlement of Rio Hato, everything was fine, but here a change occurred. The road deteriorated significantly, and the traffic nearly tripled. In these places, I could hardly believe my eyes. We also crossed the runways of an airport. It was probably an aviation day because streams of cars, from both directions, were heading there. We continued on, passing many smaller settlements and towns. The road now led through gently undulating terrain. We stopped at a fruit stand where we bought a few bananas and tangerines. It was hot again. The bad road was replaced in some sections by a perfect asphalt road. However, the traffic on the road moved somewhat slower due to the poor condition of some cars, which were difficult to overtake. But we only had a few dozen miles left. Before Panama City, we got onto a very good road that led us to the Thatcher Bridge, also known as the Bridge of the Americas. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that this bridge connects Central America with South America. The bridge is 5,425 feet long, approximately 1,800 m, and high enough for all ships to pass under it. It was a very interesting sight, and we were already in Panama City. A multi-lane road led us further into the city center. Poor suburbs of people, mostly black, living in unusual houses, perhaps of Spanish and French origin, glued together from wood and corrugated iron. The houses almost moved, they were so overcrowded. Their balconies were decorated with freshly laundered clothes. Extraordinary, lively, busy, colorful, and poor. Then came somewhat more orderly neighborhoods. However, we didn't reach the true city center. Gary headed further, towards Cologne. But outside the city, he stopped at a small factory parking lot. We ate something and thought about what to do next. We decided to find a campsite. So we turned back and drove back into the city. Someone told us that it was possible to camp near the football stadium, which we found quite soon. A convenient place. Gary secured his Airstream, and then we stood outside. Young black men came up to us, asking if we had a ball. Gary did, so we played soccer. After an hour, however, we got tired, both from running and the heat. I sat down, and one of the boys started pestering me to give him $1. I refused, so he wanted a cigarette. I offered him one, but alas! The boys, who had gathered around me in the meantime, started fighting over the cigarettes like horses. One snatched a pack from me and ran away with it. A few boys chased after him, and the rest started bothering me again, wanting some too. So I opened another pack, but the same thing happened. I had no interest in continuing this game, so I retreated to the Airstream. I was quite surprised by the audacity and arrogance of these black scoundrels. 2 VW minibuses and a Land Rover with a crew were parked nearby. We struck up a conversation with the crew of one VW, Manfred and Ernst. 2 young Germans from Munich were planning the same route through South America and, by sheer coincidence, had a reservation on the same ship, Cologne-Cartagena, as us. We agreed to meet in Cologne. They also told us that the ship was leaving a day earlier. I didn't want to believe it, but I decided to leave for Cologne tomorrow afternoon. Then we parted ways. Gary's family and Zita decided to go to an international basketball game, Cuba, Panama, Puerto Rico. I had a headache, so I stayed home. I took a shower and then hung around a bit. When everyone returned, I felt a little better. My friends were quite enthusiastic about the game. I listened to their sports analysis and then went to bed. Panama City, January 26th. We slept in a bit. I wanted to get a visa for Colombia and also planned to visit a Volvo service center. We said goodbye to Gary and Ida and agreed to meet tomorrow at 6 p.m. in Cologne. We drove down into the city, found the consulate, and took care of the necessary arrangements there. The city center is quite nice, I would say Americanized. Then we set off to find the Volvo service center. It wasn't exactly easy, but at least we saw other parts of this city, from the beautiful, residential areas on the Pacific coast to those narrow, winding, and smelly streets, full of an atmosphere of poverty and hardship. It was quite unusual to hear black people speaking Spanish. We drove around several blocks, crisscrossing. I wanted to film something here, but thought it would be tactless. There were so many people that it wasn't easy to hide the camera lens from their eyes. Finally, we found Volvo, but it was closed for the lunch break. When the staff returned, we found out that they couldn't do anything for me. I only had a small problem with the exhaust, so I wasn't too upset. However, I bought new brake pads here because I'm starting to fear that South America will be even more limited in the selection and availability of services and spare parts. Around 1 p.m., we set off for Cologne. A good road led us through a lush green landscape, with abundant vegetation and several farmsteads. gentle hills. Finally, we arrived in Cologne, 67,565 inhabitants, the second largest city in Panama. A very busy city with rows of those unusual, stylistically, houses that we had already seen in certain districts of Panama City. The majority of the population is black, and there is always something happening or being worked on everywhere. It wasn't difficult to find the office of the Italian line, where we were supposed to report to complete the final formalities and confirm our departure. The price remained the same, $467. However, we had to go to the customs office and tomorrow for confirmation at the Colombian consulate and one of the U.S. offices. Canal Zone. When we came out, Manfred and Ernst had just arrived from Panama City. We agreed to meet on the coast, near the Colombian consulate. We took care of the last details and parked next to our friends before sunset. We had dinner together in their VW, and then we talked about our travel impressions over a glass of beer. There, beyond the walls of water, a new continent awaited us. Good night. Cologne, January 27th. We got up around 7 a.m. We were supposed to be at the port at this hour, but oh well, we're the customers after all. They inspected the condition of the vehicle, wrote everything down, and also wanted to pump the gasoline out of the tank. They could have said something. We parked the car at the port and walked to the Colombian consulate. It was quite a distance, but we had plenty of time. It was hot and humid. We walked through a fairly busy section of the street, heading towards our destination. Lots of shops and stalls, passers-by. Further from the city center, the street became quiet. Poor-looking houses and their inhabitants. The street is almost deserted, until now. A young black man, perhaps 17 to 20 years old, stands on the sidewalk with his hands in his armpits. As we pass him, he seems to nod in greeting. I returned it. There was something strange in his expression, perhaps a certain degree of concentration, or something nefarious. I don't know, I didn't pay him any more attention. It was hot, and I was only thinking about getting all these formalities with our loading over with. Someone jumped on me from behind, tried to hold my arms, and reached into my pocket with the other hand. I had $500 with me this time, as I didn't want to leave it in the car. However, my reaction was surprisingly swift. I turned around, ready to defend myself. Yes, it was the same black man we had just passed. However, I only had one hand free because the other was clutching the wad of money, so I received a small blow to the teeth. At that very moment, my patience ran out. However, the black hero took to his heels in the next split second, and I really didn't consider chasing him. It might not have turned out in my favor. The important thing at that moment was that I had saved my $500. Zita only came to life now and started calling the police. But I insisted that we get out of there as quickly as possible, as I realized that we had found ourselves in the wrong place. The police were around the corner, so Zita described the whole incident to them. Plainclothes police were called, who took us to the station and took a statement from us. From there, the guys took us directly to the consulate and advised us to use the main street or a taxi on the way back. The neighborhood we had just passed through is said to be very dangerous. At the Colombian consulate, we paid $15 for some kind of stamp for our documents and returned to the port. We waited for boarding until 2 p.m. We met 2 Italians, brothers, and a woman from Venezuela here, so the time passed quickly in an interesting conversation. Finally, we found ourselves in our cabin, where we rested a bit. Then we ran back and forth to familiarize ourselves with our ship. I found out that my car was on the upper deck, which was very convenient for me because I needed some things and a change of clothes. Around 6 p.m., we went to our meeting with Gary. We waited for perhaps 45 minutes, but Gary was nowhere to be found. So I wrote a short farewell letter and left it at the Italian line office. We returned to the ship. I took a shower. I wasn't even done when Ida and Keith appeared at the door. They came to say goodbye. Very thoughtful and kind. We shook hands and wished each other a safe journey. Gary hadn't yet decided where he would go, but definitely not to South America. What a pity! Very nice people, we will probably miss them. Dinner was ready. We shared a table with two nuns. They taught somewhere in Peru. The older one was ending her career, perhaps after 35 years, because she had cancer. She knew it and yet was pleasant, smiling, composed, and perhaps even happy. My admiration went out to her. She was returning to her homeland Germany. But she said she would miss it, even though life there was hard. The younger one was only accompanying her on her probably last journey. Dinner was generally good, but I expected more. Then we went to our cabins and back out for some air. We met our nuns again in the hallway, and so we talked for perhaps half an hour about life and things around it. Zita started to feel a bit unwell, so she went to the cabin. I and Manfred returned after a while. She was feeling worse, but help is difficult, she just needs solid ground. Zita vomited until her stomach was empty, and I was also starting to feel seasick. I wanted to resist it, so we decided to go for a beer. Our acquaintance from Venezuela and a Swiss man were at the bar. I slowly sipped my beer, but I knew I wouldn't finish it. I felt as sick as a dog. I excused myself and went to the deck to feed the fish. Then I returned to the table. Only the Swiss man was still drinking. He had already gotten used to it. He had traveled, I think, from Santiago, Chile. I kept him company for a while. The bar was almost empty, but then I decided to go to sleep. Zita was quite ill, but so was I. After several hours of being awake, we finally fell asleep. A bad night. In the morning, we woke up in better condition, which quickly deteriorated. We naturally didn't go for breakfast and were physically weak. The ship was swaying unbelievably. I had to go to the deck to take a look. The sea seemed quite calm, but when I only observed the ship's bow, I saw 2-3 m of sway. Once down and then up. I returned to the cabin and lay down again, resting in the swaying rhythm of the ship. I felt best in this position, and so did Zita. The ship's radio invited us to lunch. We skipped that too, even though we were exhausted like flies. It was announced that we would arrive in Cartagena around 4 p.m. I went outside to take a look. I saw the South American continent for the first time. However, the ship sailed on. We prepared our luggage by the exit. But we waited a good hour for anchoring and completing some formalities. Finally, we were released.